Hi everyone, welcome to the Ecosystem Innovation video series. Today we're going to be talking about AP. When talking about AP, you've got the typical challenges, right? How do we get invoices in effectively without having too much manual intervention, right? There's a whole host of challenges around invoice management and the challenges that AP have, and the way that invoices come into the organization is naturally a big one. So how do we manage that more effectively? And you know, there's still today, especially in the mid-market, still a lot of manual entry going on. You know, how do we reduce paper? Well, hey, we've got so many OCR solutions now. And people are beginning to think, oh, well, surely paper's been handled. Well, it kind of has and it kind of hasn't. I mean, people are still managing invoices, paper invoices, through OCR scanning houses, and then you have the inherent challenges that presents. Although we've come a long way, we still have challenges in that area. Because ultimately we want to fast track, although this goes against the AP mantra, the payment of those invoices and improving supplier relationship, which is where I think the procurement and AP visions can sometimes collide. But where organizations are connecting the two worlds more effectively, that's where we've seen a huge amount of benefit. Now, electronic invoicing, in today's day and age, especially when COVID happened, we've had that challenge. We've seen it already with organizations that moved to electronic document exchange were further ahead in terms of managing their supply chain and procurement and invoice channels. So how much of our invoice real estate can we make electronic? Are people even looking at that? My view is people still don't understand networks, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. In addition to that, going electronic, removing the manual entry, etc., has become super important in the digital age. A lot of this is already managed quite intelligently and efficiently through the SAP Solution Suite. So the Ariba Network, we do a lot of that already. In fact, I would say organizations, prospects, and even some customers are still not leveraging it as much as they could. We've got OCR management. We've got line level invoice matching, the intelligence around that, ensuring that we don't get bad invoices into the solution, all of the workflow, etc. That's all available. That's available today. But there's still a lot more that can be done. How do we get to zero-touch invoicing? That's the holy grail. Make invoicing smart so that you leverage the underlying technology, but you add intelligence to automate the whole process, therefore reducing the overhead on AP even further. Today, I've got Paul Jones from ExceleratedS2P. He's the MD of Europe for Accelerated. We're going to talk about the really great app that they've just brought out called Intelligent Invoice Express. And that really streamlines this whole process further. Hi, Paul. Welcome to the video today. Appreciate you coming on board.
Hey, Mo. Yeah, no, great. Thank you for having me. And yeah, look, you know, building on, you know, there's a couple of things. You know, the AP automation sort of business challenge, certainly in the current COVID environment, has been very topical for us with clients. You know, right. You know, an expectation of having sort of the importance of AP automation when your whole workforce or your outsourced workforce are all having to work virtually or remotely, right? Yeah. But then, you know, secondly, the importance of paying suppliers on time, you know, or possibly even paying suppliers early in what is a very financially pressurized environment for the supply chain. So, and then the third thing
is, right? I mean, as I was saying, I think that in a lot of organizations that I've seen, you know, there were companies moving payment terms to like 90 days or 120 days. But I think in today's age, I think what you've just said is really important, because I think there's a shift, right? It's kind of moving the other way.
And regardless of what you do with payment terms, whether you want to take the working capital benefit and extend, right, or whether you want to pay suppliers early and be corporately responsible, you can often not do either of those unless you've got an efficient AP and P2P process, right? That's the prerequisite. I think the other important, on the app side for us as a company, we've responded to the pandemic by being more innovative as well. That's really important. So we've taken the mantra. We'll talk. I think we'll do a few of these videos, but this is the first of them. But we built these apps literally in a matter of weeks during the pandemic, right? So as an SME organization ourselves, our response to the pandemic has been, let's be more innovative. Let's invest in some of that innovation, right?
Yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about that, the overall process in terms of, the invoice management and the different steps and where you've seen the gaps and why?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a couple of use cases for us. You're absolutely right. One of the major use cases for some of the large multinational clients is strategic spend, suppliers with some of that high volume transaction volume. Sure. It can be relatively well automated, either via OCR or by true, machine to machine, integration. Or actually, if you look at the mid and the long tail of the supply base, it's still very manual, right? It's still very paper based. There's lots of churn in the supply base. And actually, if you look at where AP spend their effort, it's on that tail and mid range, right? So you look at the cost of AP. The cost of AP is spent dealing with less than 20% of the volume, right? So that the app particularly is really geared around looking at some of those suppliers which have a low level of invoice volume. Maybe you then look at where we've got image enabled, where you've got the sort of data capture, the scanning, the OCR, the workflow type tools, maybe some of the taxation that they have to do. In a number of customers that we've worked with this year, there's still an accuracy and an efficiency component to that. Are those imaging and enabled type invoice channels really working? And how accurate are those, and how much efficiency are they getting from those? So
it's a bit of a difficult one, right? I mean, historically, OCR's got a hell of a lot better, but there is a kind of a cap point. In my view, I think where you get to the point where, okay, you're always gonna need people in the background. You're always gonna have that kind of outsourced piece in the background trying to help manage those, the pieces that the machine couldn't do. But I think even with the advent of PDF invoices now, right? I think that whilst I think that's made a relatively big change, I still think that there's things that can be done right around the whole zero touch process.
Yeah, correct. And look, that the key for us was build an app that complements the roadmap to e-invoicing, true electronic invoicing, straight through processing, potentially even, as I said earlier, right, provides that prerequisite to really smart invoicing, right? Because then delivering an AP automation, we can then really start to look at the additional payable benefits around, dynamic discounting, early payment discount, working capital benefits. But really, until you get to that, it makes some of those other important strategic initiatives within the payables really difficult to execute. So yeah, look, that's certainly the use case. Look, a couple of business scenarios where we've really made that happen. I've got two I'd like to talk about. The typical one, as I said, right, has been you go in and see 80% of the volume, 80% of the spend, with typically only 20% of the suppliers, right? Yeah. Reasonably well automated, reasonably, suppliers using, in this instance, using the Ariba network to drive that sort of, AP automation. And actually, but 20% of the volume, 20% of the spend, albeit with probably 80% of the suppliers and a high proportion of AP's time being spent on that still felt like white space for a lot of clients driving that AP automation. So
let's just, if you don't mind, Paul, if you don't mind, just a quick one. I think to my earlier point, I still think that people don't understand the network, right? In terms of the value that it brings. So talking about that 80%, you know, when we talk about networks or supplier portals, and there is a subtle difference between the two, the whole idea of leveraging a network to create a more electronic, intelligent collaboration between buyers and suppliers, and in a one-to-many or many-to-many framework. I think it's important to note that, you know, we've got millions of suppliers on the network, but what that actually means is taking away some of that noise through the intelligence on the network. And I think that Ariba already does a really good job of doing that. I think people need to understand that better, and that's probably not for this video, but it's an important part. That 80% of spend that we're talking about for your large suppliers, they're already doing this electronic piece. And if you're not leveraging that today, you should start looking at leveraging that. But to your point, the 20% of tail spend, that's where you've got the volume of suppliers, right? And that volume of suppliers, I know that there's been a big push to go towards PDF, but I think, and this is kind of where you were going, but what is it that you're seeing in that tail that is a challenge? So we've got, you know, people will say, oh, well, why don't you just move to PDF invoicing? There's challenges with that as well, right? So why don't you talk about that process?
I think really the challenge has been supplier adoption, right? You know, if you think about some of the you know, the functionality within the network, you know, the use of PO flip, right, and then flipping that. I still think there's, in some cases, there's not as big a take up from the tail with some of those options. You then look at the PDF, you then look at some of the you know, the ease of use, and you really want to make it, you know, you really want to make it one click, flip an invoice, flip it to a PDF. It goes into an inbox, you know, it's OCR'd, some inbuilt exception handling, and that leads to straight through process, right? So what we saw, you know, jointly with SAP Ariba, was how do we build an app that really is really easy to use for the suppliers, really easy for them to effectively, you know, not even install it, right? It's just something that they can use with, you know, with an email address on day one, but also is got underpinning it some really sort of efficient technology and accuracy built into it, right? And then supports the strategy of having all suppliers, you know, driving their through a single AP solution, right? That I think the supplier adoption piece in the tail was the key driver for us. How do we put something in place that can then really allow us to drive the same level of supplier adoption you get in the 80%? How do we drive that same level of adoption in the tail, and do that at scale, right? Because you're not talking about 200 vendors, you're talking about 2,000 vendors with some of the, or even more with some of the larger clients.
Buyers using the Ariba network have been successful in getting most of their suppliers transacting electronically. But what happens to those few key suppliers who insist on sending PDF invoices over email? Intelligent Invoice Express allows you to digitize all of these invoices into one application for verification and validation prior to posting in your ERP for payment. When the supplier has created an invoice and it is ready to send, the supplier will email the PDF invoice to the buyer's designated mailbox. A confirmation email from the Intelligent Invoice Express app will be sent to the supplier confirming the invoice was received and is in process. Intelligent Invoice Express then receives the PDF invoice and begins the process of converting that invoice into an electronic document that can be imported into the buyer's AP system. The app will send the invoice to CloudTrade, where it will go through a data extraction process to convert invoice detail into an electronic digitized format. The Intelligent Invoice Express app will reflect in real time the status of the invoice, as well as provide additional information received from the supplier's email. After the invoice conversion process is complete and the invoice is digitized, the invoice and PDF are passed into the buyer's AP system. Once logged into your AP system, you can see the fully rendered invoice and view the original PDF that was translated. The invoice is reviewed automatically, and if any exceptions are found, they are displayed and routed accordingly to the appropriate person for reconciliation. If updates to the invoice are needed, changes can be easily made during this process. To allow greater visibility to invoice status, including payment information, the invoice will automatically be carbon copied to the Ariba network. The Intelligent Invoice Express app includes built-in AP automation capabilities such as invoice line item matching with PO lines, OCR capability, Excel template invoices, and non-PO invoice with default coding for additional automation. Built-in automation means more accurate and faster entry of invoices. The Intelligent Invoice Express app is available directly from the SAP App Center, which also provides pricing and technical information. Alternatively, you can request your own demo by contacting ExceleratedS2P.
That was interesting. I think it does show the simplicity of the tool. But let's put that into some customer scenarios, as you were talking about before, and so the audience gets an understanding of how your customers have adopted this and the kind of challenges that they've then been able to address.
Yeah, so you know, working with a couple of our sort of our early adopters. You know, we got one particular client, you know, sort of global engineering organization, where the big benefit for them was business case around reducing reducing the cost of AP. Right, that they looked and said, 85% of the cost of their AP had actually was focusing on the exceptions, right? Focusing on the tail, focusing on those invoices not going through the sort of happy path, the happy automation path. So really simply, aligned the sort of the deployment of the app with their ongoing supplier enablement activity, and that was really important. Actually, in some respects, re-energized their supplier adoption program. But introducing a really simple channel for those tail suppliers, right? We managed to get a high volume of those suppliers on really quickly. AP over time saw the benefit of that, and then really we've really scaled that, right? We've taken out about 50% of the cost of AP just with the app. I mean, there's an ongoing supplier enablement, supplier adoption program that's going to drive that further. So look, that's a really simple example based on what you've seen, where we've rolled that out in a really traditional format, based on the core use case of where the tool is aimed at.
Just thinking about that, I mean, if you take that customer example, I mean, if you look at the volume of suppliers, how did you work with the customer to decide which suppliers to go with? Or did you do that as a program to say, well, we're going to communicate to all of the suppliers and then see which ones are ready to adopt it? Or did you do that through the ones that were doing the largest volume or the largest spend?
Yeah, no, we did a mix of both. I mean, obviously, look, this particular client had obviously been through a supplier enablement program as part of their original implementation, and had got a fair degree of success around that. So we obviously had feedback from the suppliers in that original deployment. So we already had an idea of which suppliers, not just based on volume, but also just based on some of that supplier interaction as part of that original deployment. But then, look, we treated it as a program. We started with, we segmented the suppliers into that sort of, looked at transaction volume, looked at where, suppliers that just literally for whatever reason had not, not logged onto the network, not over that program for whatever reason had decided not to, or the client hadn't been able to drive some of that supplier adoption, or maybe just hadn't quite gotten to that the tail end of that supply base, and then built a supplier enablement program in conjunction to rolling out the app targeted at those specific suppliers. I think the second use case is really interesting because we're seeing where certainly some of our, a number of our global clients and some of the mid-market size clients that, have grown significantly through acquisition, working in that in some cases, working in that multi-ERP type environment. Maybe they've inherited a lot of legacy networks or EDI type solutions, right? So the network to network piece for that strategic high volume suppliers has become really important.
Especially when you do, I think through acquisition or otherwise, I think you can even have different types of invoice transactions happening with a kind of EDI supplier, usually for directs, right? So
correct.
Trying to consolidate all of that. And that's the SAP go forward strategy, right? And we're already connecting to, in the likes of the Nordics, etc., to other networks where that kind of throughput is needed, and there's especially public sector stuff.
Right.
That opens that up, right? Sorry.
It does. And look, the key for us there is, we want to protect the single AP solution across all spend, right? We want to give finance and AP, finance shared services, a single place for all invoices. But in that legacy environment where you might have already had a previous investment in EDI or some form of network, right? We also want to promote that interoperability between network. Now, the app, we've taken the app further now, which means we can now credibly, take PDF invoices from let's say non-SAP networks and push them through into Ariba Invoicing with a degree of a degree then of also non-PO routing, right? So if those invoices are coming in as a non-PO, we've also started to build in improve some of the tax determination. So once the invoice comes in and it gets into Ariba Invoicing, we're starting to do some of the pre-processing that needs to help with that straight through processing of an invoice. So that, right. You're right. In markets like the Nordics and the UK, that's where we see the roadmap for this app as well, starting to really not just look at the tail, but also start to look at the interoperability between networks, which is really a volume play as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's perfect. Cool. So I think that gives us enough background. I mean, you guys are all geared up to show the integrated demo scenarios of this. So for anybody, again, whether you're an existing SAP Ariba customer, or you're a customer, who's got this challenge and you've got multiple streams of invoicing and you're using the Ariba network, or you're a prospect looking at Ariba and wondering, well, okay, actually we've got quite a complex AP setup, and how do we streamline that and simplify that? You can see that this app can take all of the goodness that I think we've already built, but really streamlines it further in the areas where we know that AP struggles most, in that 20% of the tail, or some of the interoperability where you may have multiple networks through different acquisitions or otherwise. So,
and Mo, you're right. Look, the ideal customer profile, you're absolutely spot on. I think where we've got existing Ariba Invoicing or existing Ariba Network customers that are trying to drive and increase supplier adoption, both in the tail, but maybe also in the strategic place. If they've got a network, that's really the core essence of how we built it. Look, we also work, as you know, right, with a lot of SAP customers where maybe we work in what we call a hybrid P2P type scenario, right, where you might use let's say your core S4 or ECC to do some of your invoice processing. You may use SAP vendor invoice management in conjunction with the Ariba network and the Ariba invoicing. Again, the app and the use case and how we're developing the app, it absolutely works in that scenario as well.
It's funny, right? I think that and this is what I really like about this app, and why I wanted to talk about it is because you have really targeted an area that almost all of the invoice solutions I've seen, and not just SAP, right? I mean, I've worked for other invoice solution providers in the past, but they don't focus on that piece. And ironically, I think that's where AP has the biggest pain. So I think you've done a really good job there, because it's been a gap for a long time.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you. Look, it's been great talking. Thanks for having me.
No. Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate your time. And like you said earlier, we're going to have more of these videos because, you've built a few more with some excellent use cases. Do you want to just really briefly touch upon them so the audience knows the kind of subjects that we're going to talk about?
Yeah. I mean, look, we've there's a number of innovations. We built a for heavy regulated, like life sciences, financial services, even the entertainment industry, where you've got suppliers that, for example, in life sciences, right, where you've got healthcare professionals as a supplier, right?
Yeah.
And the GDPR, the sort of data protection. So we built an encrypted supplier data portal for those suppliers, which works in conjunction to the Ariba SLP module, but that's very targeted at those industries where you've got a real regulatory data protection requirement across the information you hold on some of those suppliers that fit into that category. So that's one of the modules.
Yeah, in case anybody doesn't know what SLP means, that's the Ariba Supplier Lifecycle and Performance module. Sorry.
Yeah, no, correct. Then, building out, we've built out using SAP Analytics Cloud. We're building out a sort of category manager dashboard capability, which pulls data from ERP and let's say all of the Ariba modules, but those dashboards are automated. They're pre-built. They plug into your solution straight away, and they can, they're literally plug and play. So the category manager dashboard, which will evolve, I think, into different personas like CPOs, finance, AP, right? But we'll probably evolve that over time. And then there's a really interesting one. We're calling it at the minute, it's a non-catalog wizard, linked into Ariba buying. So very much around operational procurement, but it's effectively like a catalog scraper. Okay. So it certainly extends the use of spot buy.
Yeah.
But in some territories, so it extends the use case around spot buy, but obviously in some geographical territories where sometimes the spot buy solution for whatever reason isn't available, isn't stood up in those regions, then it could even it could even sort of work along. And what it does, it gets content into the system quickly, as a means of search and punch. It can also search, punch out catalogs, but it can basically search the World Wide Web for some of that content as well. So that's cool. So look, there are a few of the ones, certainly the newer ones that we'd like to talk to you about over the next few weeks and months.
No, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Paul. Really appreciate your time. And yeah, we'll be back on this very soon. And listen, anybody who's interested in any of this, the links will be down below in the description of the video. So you can connect with Paul and the team, or reach out to me directly as well. Thanks again, Paul. See you on the next one.
Cheers. Thank you.
See ya. Bye.